Great. So here we are, the pretty traditional setup of a hip hop track, quote unquote vocals over a two track. The two track here being a fantastic MP3, um, probably made in either Fruity Loops or maybe in a keyboard, a Phantom, a Triton, but perhaps just made in Fruity Loops. So with this comes a few problems. Obviously, you're stuck with whatever the two track has to offer, which a lot of times is not very much. And I don't mean musically. I just mean frequency wise, and especially if you're looking to get something out there in an MP3 type format. You're sort of limited by the frequency response of these MP3s. So we bring it into a Pro Tools session like we have here, and we can do some things with it. As you can see here too, we have the hook vocals separated with the verse. It looks like there's a single, double, triple, as well as in the verse there's single, double, triple. There's an intro that every song needs, basically to give a shout out to the label or introduce the artist. I'm surprised there is no outro on this track. As you can see, usually they thank everyone who was involved in the recording, including people from. So if you look here, also there's then an ad trip. Also, there's the ad lib track down here as well. So immediately I'm just going to throw the ad lib track up here with the rest of the vocals. Sometimes there's a double ad lib track. They double, single, double, and triple that. In this case, it looks like there's just one. So we may have to treat this one a little bit special. You can see also too on this intro track, apparently there's also a little bit of ad lib here as well. Just to give you the basic structure, most hip hop artists structure their songs by basically sort of adding up this intensity with a double or single, double, and triple. If you go over here to the mix window, you can see here basically there's no panning right now whatsoever. If you even just look at the hooks vocal here, they're calling it a stack. You can call it a stack. Sometimes it's a double, triple. The idea with the stack sometimes too is usually you see this sort of kind of hierarchy as each stack is a little bit quieter than the other. For this song in particular, I started to actually start panning things out. When somebody does a double, single, triple, quadruple, and really starts stacking a lot on the hook, the panning becomes less of an issue. Basically what they're trying to do is build the intensity of the voice, and sometimes you want to spread it out. Other times, if the double and triple is not as tight with the single or the original, then panning it can be problematic. But in this song, there's actually a pretty good tightness within the vocal. So this is pretty straightforward. I mean, this is not something I haven't seen 1,000 times. So what I'm actually going to do is open up a little template I have for what I call the 10-minute mix, which is appropriate for the mixtape, because the mixtape is really not meant to be the highest quality recording, but rather sort of a showcase for the artist, so that they can either sell it or to make more money, to get more studio time, or to catch the interest of producers that may record or create an instrumental for them in a more professional capacity. So let's go ahead here, and what I'm going to do is Option Shift I, which is import session data, and sure enough, I'm going to import basically this mix that I did, and I'm going to import the session data from that. So I'm going to open that session, and you can see it allows me to look at all the tracks here. And what I'm going to do is go into basically go to my aux tracks here, which is a hook vox, verse. I have a little delay going on, and then I have some special stuff happening on my master fader. I don't want to bring in the tempo and the key signature. Import, replace existing playlist. That's fine. So let's go ahead and open it. Cool. So as you can see, basically what happened now, I have a master fader. There's two actually master faders in the session now, so I can go ahead and just get rid of this master fader and make this the new master fader. As you can see, I'm using a Motu interface, so I'll just send it out 1 and 2. I didn't like the fact that I had 2 master faders. So basically what I've imported here is basically a Hookvox track, a verse compressor, and basically a delay. Sometimes you use reverb, but a lot of times in hip hop, the genre is a very, very small environment. In other words, the actual space and the recording is very, very small. If you go back to like Tupac, I mean, there was a little bit of a sense of a room, that type of thing. But most of the stuff today really takes away a lot of the room ambiance to really kind of create that vocal booth sound, that really tight, that really kind of very small, closed space that is basically as loud as possible, so it can rattle as many bumpers as possible. Speaking of rattling bumpers, the first thing we probably want to do is take a look at the 2-track, where if you take a look here, basically there's some issues with it. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is actually use this wonderful plugin, Waves plugin called the C4. And the great thing about the C4 is that it basically not only is a multi-band compressor, meaning you can compress the low, mid, high, or basically 4 bands here: low, mid, high, mid, and highs. You can compress each band differently. Just as like sort of a go ahead here, you can go and low end enhancer. You can just see what this is actually doing now. It's actually compressing the low end a little bit less, and the attack time is actually fairly fast. So there's a lot of different presets here. You can also mess around with it. One of the nice things to do sometimes is to actually boost the high frequencies, compress them a little bit more, and actually bring them up. That'll give a nice shimmer to the track. Probably you never want to boost the 1K to 4K range because that's where the spitting is going to be. And if you put too much energy there in the 2-track, you'll really start to argue with your vocals. Next, you can see I already have set up a Hookvox. So I've made this input hook. So what I'll actually do is I'll select, by holding shift, I'll select all the Hookvox, and then holding option shift, I'll select the output, and that output I'll send to a bus, and that bus is going to be the hook bus. Okay. And then also here I'll select all the verse tracks as well by holding shift, and then option shift on the output, send it to the bus, and that will be the verse bus. Basically the outro and ad libs, holding shift, I'm going to select them all, and then actually by holding command I can unselect these, and these I'm going to send as well to the verse, which I have a little bit different setup on. So basically now all the tracks are either going to hook Vox compressor aux to the verse comp, or, well, nothing's going to the delay yet except these individual tracks. So if you look, what I've basically put on here is a simple RVox. RVox is a wonderful Renaissance plugin. It's a Waves plugin. This one is really great for speech. And if you think about it, spitting or rapping is probably a lot closer to speech than, say, singing. Even though I've used this a lot on singers as well, it really helps to just get a vocal to sit out in front. And it gives it that sort of expensive sound that we're used to hearing, which is a basically well compressed, sometimes a little bit over compressed, in your face sort of sound. If you can see here, I've used my favorite EQ, which is the API 550B. I've always loved the API EQs. One of the first boards I got an opportunity to work on was an API, and I've just always loved the EQs. I'm also a really big fan of their compressor, but we won't be needing that today. So if you look here, what I've basically done is I've boosted that sort of 3K range. I've reduced the 1K range. That's going to be the wonk and kind of sort of this type of area here, if you can hear that. And the 3K should help bring out some of the consonants and the sibilants, right? In hip hop, they really overdo this a lot. I don't know if it has to do with hearing damage that some people have, whether it's the engineers or the actual people listening to it. But it's usually very, very bright. If you can see too here, I've also with shelf EQ here, I've cut everything below 50. The more and more you cheat on this, the higher you bring it up to 100, 200, 300, 400, you're really going to start to cut a lot of the low end out of the voice. And if you bring it all the way up to 400, you may really make somebody sound like a chipmunk, really take a lot of the low ends, sort of the strumph out of their voice. So basically, these are the same setups on both tracks. So now all the vocals are actually being sent to either the hook Vox or the verse compressor. I've also added a little delay for both of these tracks. The delay that I'm using is a short delay. This short delay you can see is only 11 milliseconds and then 28 milliseconds on the other side. Make sure you take off the depth, rate, and feedback on both sides because they are absolutely horrible and they make this plugin sound like junk. But the actual just delay feature of it is really fantastic. And if you have it at 100% here and you vary the delay to it, you can help to really kind of spread out the vocals. Using a delay instead of reverb is going to push the vocals back and create more space, which is not really idiomatic or characteristic of hip hop. It's usually a much smaller space. So delay will give us a sense of a small space, a small room, but help us basically spread it out over the stereo field left and right. Feel free to add some of the 2-track to this delay as well. Because that'll actually help mix the hook and verse Vox with the actual 2-track. The only other thing that I add is just the L1. If you can see, the level is so loud on this 2-track that and after the C4, I don't really need any more reduction, but basically I'm just putting the out ceiling at 0.3, minus 0.3. Some people do minus 0.5. Some people are really less daring and put it at -1. I like to put it at 0.3 because I like to get my stuff as hot as possible. Basically, it means nothing will get ever louder than -0.3. So you won't clip the stereo bus at all or your master fader. So this is pretty much a basic setup. Now, all the levels that you pick for the track and, the amount of delay you send, this is all your taste and what you think works best for the track. But this basic setup will really help you sort of get that 10-minute mix, as I call it, or that quick mix on a song, especially if an artist wants to take something home with them, in the last 10 minutes of the session, or, you need to get something quick out to a client. And if they're only using it for a mixtape, then this setup is completely fine. Now, when we're talking about the real album and, we're talking about other genres of music and or even this genre, but with more of a live feel, say something like The Roots, this method obviously would not work. And most of the recordings that you hear out there, perhaps something by Jay-Z, they spend $30,000 on the mix alone. So you can bet that engineer is not using a 10-minute mix. But basically to get us going here and, get some hour sessions going and getting paid, knocking out some rent, this 10-minute mix will help you out a lot.